doing this for 9 months, 10 months. People have pandemic fatigue. They want to go to their favorite coffee shop. They want to work out in their gym. There's no way to do it 100% completely safe, but there are ways to do it safer. And that means a few things. One, the less people in there, the less contact you're going to have, the less chances of getting or spreading coronavirus. So call ahead and say, what are you doing? Are you limiting crowds? Are you making sure tables are socially distanced? If you're in a gym, probably even more than that 6 feet, because people are huffing and puffing, and sometimes they shout out in the middle of their exercise. And that means that their exhaust or their virus could potentially go further. So you have to be careful there as well. And if you do go to a place like this and you see it's crowded, turn around and walk away, especially if people aren't wearing masks. But one thing about restaurants and bars you have to remember is you almost cheat on that mask to a certain extent because you're wearing it. But then once you have to eat or drink, you pull it down, you're still breathing, you're still probably talking, and you're definitely eating. That's when the virus can come out again and go even further. So again, look at the situation. Don't be afraid to just turn around or embarrassed to just turn around and say, I'll try it another day.
Yeah, Dr. John, it's funny. I thought about this with the coffee shop thing the other day because I typically make coffee at home. I'm in the city. I thought I'll pick up a cup on my way to work. And then I looked at the amount of people that touched the cup, putting the top on the to-go cup. I'm in the inside coffee shop with the people, and I looked around and thought, this is probably not a very good idea. And I haven't been doing it as often as I normally would. You just start to visualize all the potential points of danger.
That's a great way to look at it because everybody that touches it, everybody that breathes around you, that's all possible contaminations. You have to be careful.
Governor Cuomo is also limiting private indoor gatherings in New York to just 10 people ahead of Thanksgiving. Is there a safe way to gather right now with people that you don't live with, or should you just avoid that altogether?
You know, Allison, for months we've been talking about bars, restaurants, and gyms being the areas where the virus has spread the most. But now we found out that we have to add these small group gatherings, these family gatherings or friend gatherings, because they're also being hot spots for the virus spreading. And possibly even super spreader events can happen out of these. So you need to be very careful. And what I would do is, yes, if there are people in your own household, definitely stay with them. That's the safest environment. But if you invite other people in, have ground rules in place. Have they been taking care of themselves for the past couple weeks? Have they been avoiding crowds, wearing masks, doing those things that you're doing? And if not, say, you know, let's do this later. We can certainly do it next year. But if you think they're safe and they've been doing the right things, then certainly invite them into your homes. But when they're in your house, remember, everybody they've been in contact with, you're now in contact with through them. And so social distance inside the house. Every expert I've talked to, and this week I've talked to a lot of infectious disease experts, I asked them the question, for Thanksgiving in particular, if you have people outside your house, in the house, should you be wearing masks? And uniformly, the answer is yes. You should be wearing masks unless you're eating or drinking. Make sure you do that because that's going to keep you safe, Allison.
Dr. John, at the height of New York's COVID crisis, health officials had limited gatherings indoors to 10 people. Look, the way I see this is they just must think things are going to get pretty bad if we need these types of restrictions again. Your thoughts here? You know, we knew it was bad in the spring. The summer, it seemed like things were getting better. I talked to you, and our conversations seem to be increasingly more serious, increasingly more concerned. What's your sense here? I mean, I think we're all starting to feel a little bit of COVID panic again.
And I think that's something a lot of people, like you said, are starting to feel, and for a very good reason, because those numbers are going higher. And I think what you're seeing here is they're trying, again, those small curfews, those small lockdowns, and then saying, okay, limit even your household gatherings to 10 people. In Denver, they're limiting that to 5 people because they're having so many problems there as well. And what they're trying to do is, I think, give people guidelines saying, if you can keep it to 10 people, for the average house, you could probably social distance. You know, if you're going to do things outdoors, you could probably do it even more. But the important thing to remember, Allison, is that 6 feet we talk about, that's just a starting point. The further away you can get, the better. And then oftentimes that 6 feet turns into 5 or 4 feet, just innocently. We don't even really recognize that. And so you have to be extremely careful. So I think what they're trying to do is give us the message and give us some guidelines that, hey, we need to clamp down on this. We need to modify our human behavior before things start getting worse, and we have to step in and do even more things.
Yeah, I heard today Dr. Richard Besser even said he lives right near his parents who happen to be in their 90s. And he said, I'm not going to see them Thanksgiving. We're going to make sure they get a meal. We're going to Zoom with them. But I'm not going to see my 90-year-old parents who live right down the road because it's just not safe. And to hear him say that really strikes you that you got to make major changes this holiday season. The status quo just won't do. I have to ask this question, and then I'm going to just stop being so doom and gloom here. But hospitalizations hit an all-time high yesterday. Are you concerned that we'll see another shortage of resources, things like ventilators, PPE, PPE, ICU beds, or is that something that we are better prepared for than we were last spring?
And Allison, this is where I'll be a little bit hopeful. I think we're better prepared than we were in the spring for a couple of reasons. One, we aren't getting nearly the number of hospitalizations. We aren't getting nearly the number of ICU admissions because of who it's actually affecting at this point. It's younger adults versus March and April tended to be older adults. But we are seeing in certain areas where that's a problem. The one thing we have learned is, number one, how to treat patients more effectively with coronavirus. But we've also worked out the distribution system. So if one hospital is getting overcrowded, then they're starting to distribute those patients to other hospitals. Not an ideal situation for families who are looking in on their loved ones, but it gets the resources spread through different communities, through different states, so we can make sure that's more even than it was back in March and April. Because in March and April, we'd only been a few months into this. It took us a bit by surprise just how many numbers there were, but then we had the months to prepare for it, so they're better prepared. Doesn't mean we can't get to that point again, and that's why we need to all do the things that those 4 W's we talk about to make sure that we get things under control so we don't get to that point. And plus, on top of the 4 W's, your flu shot. That can help as well. We don't want that twindemic to happen.
Yeah, definitely get the flu shot if you haven't already. I got it, and it made me feel just a little bit better about all of this. Dr. John, thank you, and thanks for ending on a hopeful note. I know there's a lot of rough news that we have to get out there.
You bet.
President Trump and President-elect Joe Biden both paying tribute to our military heroes on this Veterans Day. This morning, President Trump visited Arlington National Cemetery, where he laid a wreath at the tomb of the unknown soldier. It was his first public appearance this week. Meanwhile, Joe Biden spent the morning at the Korean War Memorial in Philadelphia, where the president-elect also laid a wreath in honor of our fallen servicemen and women. Meanwhile, the Trump campaign moving ahead with its legal challenges to the election while the administration delays the Biden transition. NBC News correspondent Mike Memley's in Wilmington, Delaware, with more on the president-elect. NBC News correspondent Carol Lee is in Washington, D.C., with the latest from Team Trump. Mike, we are seeing more Republicans rally around the president as he goes ahead with more legal challenges. The New York Times saying, quote, as many Republicans privately conceded that the president's claims were outlandish and mostly avoided repeating them, their public statements suggested that they had no intention of forcing Mr. Trump to accept defeat and begin preparing to hand over the reins of power. How is all of this, Mike, impacting the Bidens and their transition team?
You heard the former vice president, the president-elect yesterday, downplaying this, saying it wasn't having much of an impact. But I've been talking with Biden transition officials who say it absolutely is affecting the plans that they've been really working on for months to try to hit the ground running as fast as possible. There are just 11 weeks between Election Day and Inauguration Day, and they wanted to take action as quickly as possible, start getting some of the more than 4,000 people they had pre-screened for administration positions to go through the background checks, to go through, in some cases, the process for going through Senate confirmation underway. They wanted to be able to get into the agencies and start doing the work of taking stock of what needs to be done to hit the ground running, to have all of the information they need for what needs to be put into these agencies on day one, and that hasn't happened yet. And so they're trying to adjust at this moment. Of course, Biden's first priority is filling the West Wing, and we know they are making progress towards that goal. We expect an announcement of a chief of staff potentially by the end of the week. Ron Klain has always been the front runner, but some other names remain in contention for other senior positions, including Steve Ricchetti. There's also the issue of national security briefings. Biden has not yet had the presidential daily briefing. The Office of the Director of National Intelligence saying that until the GSA certifies he is the president-elect, which of course we know hasn't happened, they are not going to be interacting with any of the Biden team. And so the Biden officials say that they are hopeful that this process winds its way through by the end of the week. If not, they do have those options on the table, including legal action, to try to force this issue, Allison.
Carol, the Trump campaign had a press call today about the election results in Georgia, saying the president's getting closer to being reelected. But legal expert after legal expert says that these campaign lawsuits are a dead end. What are your sources telling you about how much longer this can go on before Trump concedes?
Basically the same thing, that these lawsuits are not going anywhere in terms of overturning the results of this election. Privately, people around the president have been saying that. They're increasingly saying that. There is a sense that they're trying to get that message to the president, at least to get him to some sort of acceptance of the election results. What we're told is that the president is never going to concede in the way that we are used to seeing presidents, whether they're an incumbent or a candidate for president, concede when they lose an election, that he will eventually come out and say, that he accepts the results, even though they're questionable, and we'll never really know who won. That's how people close to the president have summed up what his plans are eventually. But how long we get there, to your question, we just don't know. There were some around the president who were hoping that this would run its course by this weekend. That does not look likely. It could go on in some of the legal battles into next week. But what we're told is that the president's not going to make any sort of statement admitting that Joe Biden is entering the White House in January until this vote has been certified in a number of states. And for some states, that could be weeks away. So we're in a sort of holding pattern. We do know from our reporting today that the president had a meeting with some of his senior-most advisors, his campaign manager, some of his closest aides, his son-in-law, Jared Kushner, to sort of figure out a path forward. We just don't know exactly what that path looks like, but there is an effort to try to get the president into that mind space, as opposed to what we've seen from him on his Twitter feed, which is still wanting to relitigate this election.
Mike, according to Forbes, Dr. Fauci said discussions with Biden's team are on hold because of the transition chaos. Is the Biden team concerned about the challenges the presidential-elect will be hit with on day one of his presidency if the White House keeps blocking this transition?
Yeah, you remember in June that Joe Biden, during the campaign, said that one of the first calls that he planned to make after being declared the winner of the election was to Anthony Fauci to ask him to serve another term as part of a long career serving both Republican and Democratic presidents, especially important given the pandemic. And we haven't gotten any indication that that call was ever made. Our understanding is that given what we saw in the final days of the election, of course, President Trump suggesting he might fire Anthony Fauci after the election, this is being seen as an attempt by the Biden team to protect Anthony Fauci, not to put him in a difficult political position with the White House. Of course, President Trump can't directly fire Anthony Fauci, but this whole issue is emblematic of the challenges that the Biden team is facing. He has set up, of course, his own pandemic board. He announced that on Monday, but they can't get the full access to information like what the federal stockpiles are like of PPE, of what it's going to take to try to get a vaccine, which we just got some hopeful news on, but how to distribute that to the American people until he does get that designation as the president-elect. So there's a lot of ways in which this delay is going to affect the Biden administration, but especially troubling given the ongoing pandemic is how it might delay and impact the Biden team's ability to appropriately plan for what is the highest priority on day one.
Carol, 2 more White House officials have tested positive for COVID-19. This is now the 3rd COVID outbreak in the White House. How's the administration addressing the rising cases across the country and within their own team?
Well, that's a great question, because it would presume that they are addressing it.
Yeah.
And what we know is that we don't hear much from the White House in terms of this outbreak. We know there's frustration among aides in the White House who don't have answers to questions about contact tracing and things like that. What we learned today is that the White House political director, and another person close to the president who's outside have tested positive for coronavirus. But here's the thing. That's just what we know. There's probably, in our estimation, more cases of coronavirus that we just don't know about. I mean, that's what you hear when you talk to people inside the White House and outside. And a lot of the reason why there are also a bunch of outside advisors who are catching coronavirus is because of that East Room event on election night, where they were packed in, not socially distancing, not wearing masks. And a number of people have tested positive who were at that event, including the White House Chief of Staff, the Cabinet Secretary Ben Carson, and others. And so the previous outbreaks that we've seen at the White House, though, to answer your question, we don't know how they're handling this. They say they do contact tracing, but when you talk to people in the White House, they say they don't really have many answers, and there's a lot of frustration.
Mike Memoli, Carol Lee. Carol summed it up. Not many answers, a lot of frustration. Thank you both.
Yep.
A real close-knit group of nurses who pulled together when their boss needed help battling coronavirus.
You're not just any patient, you're their friend.
These folks saved my life. Thank God that there are people who want to run towards a pandemic as opposed to running away from a pandemic.
A real close-knit group of nurses nurses who pulled together when their boss needed help battling coronavirus.
You're not just any patient. You're their friend.
These folks saved my life. Thank God that there are people who want to run towards a pandemic as opposed to running away from a pandemic.
White sandy beaches, crystal blue water. How incredible is that? We only get one shot at making the first impression. We're here to work, or you will be gone. High maintenance charter guest.
This crew needs to step it up.
New crew, perfect storm.
This was not open!
Get back to this boat now. Suck it up, cream puff.
Set your DVR to watch new episodes of Bravo's Below Deck every Monday after 9.
You're watching NBC News Now. We've got some breaking news.
Are people there concerned about what impact this could have on the election?
It's news made for your streaming world.
I'll tell you what the American people's mandate is. Heal the nation. It's why he ran. That is why he won. That is the most critical near-term issue, managing the pandemic. It does seem as if these state polls massively misled us. If it's Sunday, it's Meet the Press.
For breaking news in our changing world, download the NBC News app.
I didn't know, was my child dead? Is my child passed out?
I just kept saying, please be okay, please be okay.
You rush your child to the hospital.
A woman came in, normal clothes. We get down the hallway, and she closes the door. They were accusing me of child abuse.
And that's when the real nightmare begins.
Hey, calm down.
No, it's my children. I can't calm down.
Do No Harm, a new podcast series from NBC News and Wondery. First 2 episodes available now. Subscribe for free wherever you get your podcasts.
NBC News correspondent Simone Boyce is here. She has the latest headlines from NBCnews.com. Simone, I have a feeling coronavirus is going to